Just a few important things before we start. This webinar series has been planned to give the audience an idea on various interlinked topics related to climate change and political risks, and we do hope you take maximum advantage of this. At the end of the webinar, you will receive a certificate acknowledging your attendance via email. Additionally, participants who attend all these sessions will receive a certificate of participation at the end of the series from Covents. I'd like to go over a few ground rules before we begin the session. The speakers will present consecutively and then we will open for questions. By default, all participants are muted. However, we do want this to be a very engaging and interactive discussion. So we encourage you to use the Q&A section to ask questions and participate in the polls that the speakers have prepared for you so that we can get a sense of your interest. The speaker will take the questions at the end of their presentations. In case you cannot hear me or the speaker clearly, or if there is some sort of lag, please refresh your browser. Do not exit the webinar. You may not be able to get back in. Now, just to give you a brief about us before we kick off, Covert Award Intelligence Solutions, Covent, is headquartered in Bangalore. At Covent, we pride ourselves on our ability to work under critical situations while maintaining the high standards and delivering optimum solutions. Political Risk and Intelligence Services Management, PRISM, is a division of Covent's focusing on providing customized solutions for interested stakeholders in the areas of political risks, focusing on geopolitical, geo-economic, socio-economic, and socio-political risk areas. To know about our various products and services, please do check out our website or get in touch with us directly. And the Center for Climate Studies at Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Manipal, aims to undertake high impact, multidisciplinary, problem driven research for end to end solutions to climate change and to create a pool of researchers to serve the growing need for sustainable climate policy, governance, and diplomacy. Coming to the topic for today's webinar, as mentioned, is technology, innovation, climate change, and businesses. We find ourselves at a critical juncture in the race to reverse climate change. The ongoing COVID-19 crisis has only exacerbated climate change and has made this challenge even tougher for us. However, the role of technology and renewable energy has come to the forefront. There is awareness at a local and community level. Businesses are adapting more sustainable models with sustainable development gaining prominence. And indeed, climate change cooperation features in many countries' foreign policy objectives as well. What role, therefore, does technology play in mitigating climate change, given some potential restraints when it comes to feasibility and accessibility? How crucial is it for businesses to continuously innovate to adapt to climate change and mitigate its risks? These are some of the many things that our speakers will touch upon over the course of this webinar. And on that note, allow me to introduce our esteemed speakers for today. Mr. Jaykumar Gaurav works as a technical advisor in the climate change team at GIZ India, where he is working on projects related to climate change mitigation and adaptation issues. He has around 11 years of diverse experience with NGOs, bilateral, multilateral organizations, and private sector organizations. He is a Commonwealth scholar and completed his master's in climate change and development from the Institute of Development Studies, University of Sussex. Prior to GIZ India, he has worked with Adelphi, International Development Enterprises India, United Nations Development Programme, and Syndicatum Carbon Capital on climate change mitigation and adaptation projects. He has also worked on MSW and e-waste management issues. His research interests are interdisciplinary and relate to political economy, technology, and financing. Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Tushar P. Ghate is a retired Army officer with more than 20 years of experience in the Corps of Engineers. During this time, he got the opportunity to contribute to the fields of bomb disposal, nuclear technology, and various instructional assignments. After voluntary retirement, he began working in the renewable energy sector with a focus on solar power generation and organic farming with an aim to contribute to the environment. He is of the opinion that to achieve Vision 2050, India needs more sustainable energy. Considering the scarcity of non-renewable energy over the next few decades, India has to plan for its own energy resources. Solar energy is one of the promising options. And in the fight against COVID 19, improving immunity is an important aspect. And to achieve this, organic farming becomes an important method for producing healthy food. He's passionate about the above two fields, and his objective is to make a workable template that can be adopted by young professionals. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to both of our speakers and thank them for their presence. Mr. Jaikumar Gaurav sir, since you will be presenting first, without any further ado, the floor is now yours.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Aditi. And first of all, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and thank to the organizer for this very timely webinar that has been organized. Aditi, would you please upload my presentation?
Yes, just a minute. It'll be uploaded.
Yeah.
Yeah, is it visible to you?
Yes, yes. But maybe the first slide.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good.
Okay, so yeah, thank you so much. So I'm Jaikumar Gaurav. I work with GIZ in India, which is the German Development Agency. And the topic for my presentation today is climate change in businesses and opportunities and challenges. So I'll talk about opportunities that are arising because of climate change and also the challenges that businesses face due to climate change. Um, Maybe we can go for a poll first. So I have this question which I would like the participants to answer, and based on that we can have a start of the presentation. So the question is that what has been the decline in daily CO2 emissions due to COVID-19 by April 2020 compared to the mean levels of 2019? So as we all know that we had a long lockdown because of COVID-19, and all of us were indoor, and a lot of business activities were restricted. So I just want to know from you that what do you think, or if you already know that what was the emission reduction? So because all our life activities lead to emissions, transportation, energy generation, industries. So when all this was stopped because of COVID-19, or most of it was stopped because of COVID-19, what would have been the reduction in emissions? Was it like 57%, 37%, 17%, or 7%? Please select one option.
So it looks like most of the 37 percentage of our votes have gone to option two. Oh, I'm sorry, 33% of our votes have gone for option two.
Okay. And it's understandable that most of the people would think that it was 37%, but actually it was just 17%. So even when in a scenario where everything was at its minimum in terms of activity, outdoor activity in particular, still our emissions were not down by like 50% or 70%. And the reason for that is because there are so many activities like electricity generation, like transportation of essential goods and services that kept contributing to the greenhouse gas emissions, particularly CO2 emissions, even when the country was in lockdown, or the different countries were in lockdown across the world. So with that understanding that, okay, this is how dependent we are on greenhouse gas emissions. This is how dependent we are on CO2 emissions, that even when we are so much restricted in our activities, there's still a lot of emissions happening. And then we have this scenario where we have to reduce these emissions significantly in the coming few years and decades to different percentages. And this is the main challenge, that we have high levels of emissions and we have to reduce those emissions, but we are so dependent for our day-to-day activities, for our commerce, for our businesses to continue on these fossil fuel emissions, that it's a big challenge. Now coming back to the presentation. Okay, next slide, please. So this slide is just to highlight that almost every day there is one or the other news article talking about either the impacts of climate change in terms of extreme weather events, disasters, or crop loss, and different sectoral impacts, or there is a discussion around the solutions that, okay, such and such company has developed this solution which can reduce emissions from an industrial process, or companies are coming up with new electric cars, and also there's a lot of activism around climate change. Like there are young people who are asking the governments across the world to reduce or to introduce policies that will help in reducing emissions, or asking companies to take action so that their carbon footprint can be reduced. Yeah, so next slide, please. This is just a basic diagram that shows what is happening in terms of climate change. So the main source or the main reason for climate change is that there are these greenhouse gas emissions, which are increasing the concentration of these already present GHGs in our atmosphere. And therefore, we have climate change. So the weather patterns are changing. Ice is melting on the caps and from the glaciers, and then the sea levels are rising. In addition, we have like increased risk of adverse health impacts, biodiversity loss, a lot of extreme weather events, a lot of rainfall in a very short span of time, long durations of drought, and all these extreme events are harming our infrastructure or causing economic and life losses. Similarly, increased frequency of natural disasters. More lightning. Even there was a recent article that linked climate change to more incidences of lightning and people dying because they get struck by lightning. So these are like the adverse impacts of climate change. And to save ourselves from the adverse impacts of climate change, we need adaptation. So that is one part of the response, where already the climate change is happening and it is having adverse impacts on us. How do we save ourselves? That's adaptation. Or how do we respond to those adverse impacts? That's adaptation. And measures to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, that is mitigation. So these are the two main sort of areas of work to address climate change. We have to adapt because there is some intensity or some degree of climate change that is already locked in, that is definitely going to happen. And then we have to reduce emissions so that the climate change, the extreme levels of changes don't happen. Next slide. So this slide talks about what is the difference between mitigation and adaptation. Because there's a lot of confusion sometimes that comes in the minds of people working outside the sector, that are we adapting to climate change by doing this, or are we mitigating climate change by doing this? So mitigation is just reducing GHG emissions or creating sinks. Sinks are like trees or carbon capture and storage, which take the GHG emissions from the atmosphere and lock it in form of carbon in trees or underground. And then adaptation is how do we adjust to the climate change impact that is already happening. So for example, building resilience to forest fires. So there is warming. We had this incidents where a lot of area under forest in Australia was burning for months. And this happened because there were not enough measures in place to save the forest from fire. Similarly, developing drought-resistant crops. So we have prolonged periods of no rainfall. Rainfall is not coming at the time when it is supposed to come. And therefore, farmers are facing challenges in providing water for their crops. And in that period of drought, what can we do so that the crops can survive. And one of the measures is there could be crop varieties that don't require so much water to grow those crop varieties, or to develop new crop varieties that are that are able to survive through droughts, in increasing water use efficiency. These are all adaptation measures. Building flood defense. We know that flood is going to happen more because of climate change, so we have to create flood defenses. So these are all adaptation measures, and mitigation measures are clean energy, energy efficiency, dietary changes in terms of going from non-vegetarian diet to vegetarian diet, because every kilo of non-vegetarian food that is consumed, it requires a lot more water, it requires a lot more energy to produce, and therefore there are more GHG emissions for equivalent amount of nutrition from vegetarian and non-vegetarian food. Energy efficiency, clean energy, and afforestation activities. These are examples of mitigation measures. Next slide, please. Now this graph is just showing the level of problem that we are having. So if you look at the graph on the left, this shows how many tons of carbon dioxide emissions happen globally, and it's roughly around 50 billion tons that is emitted every year. And if you look at the target of reducing, so if we keep this level of emission, then it's going to cause up to 3 degrees or even more warming by 2100. And if we reduce emissions by 20%, then we reach 2.2 degrees Celsius. So these two graphs, the orange line and then the green line, they are showing that if you reduce emissions, then what is the level of warming that you will achieve. So if you see all the current efforts that governments are putting in, the businesses are putting in, that is not going to help us reach the 2 degree Celsius target. We need more efforts, and if we have to reach the 1.5 degree targets, it's even more drastic changes that we are requiring. So we discussed that around 17% reduction has happened, whereas what we need is like almost in the next 10 years we have to reduce the emission levels by 50%, which is a very substantial emission reduction target that the globe has to take. So it's not one country's responsibility, but it's like all the countries in the world have to take this aim if they want to make sure that the warming doesn't go beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius. And this other image on the right hand side is very interesting because it shows that how much countries have emitted. And if we take the global carbon budget, so if we limit that, okay, you cannot go beyond this level of carbon dioxide emissions if you have to keep the climate change or global warming under 1.5 degrees Celsius, then already EU has used up 20% of the global carbon budget. US has used another 22 some percentage. Then a lot has been used by China, around 10%. Around 5 has been used by India, and rest of the world is from like 55 to 91. So we just have 9% of the carbon budget left for the next 10 years of emissions. And if we keep emitting beyond those levels, then we'll have more than 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. We have already achieved, we have already unfortunately warmed the planet by around 1 degree Celsius. And this will be another 1.5 degrees Celsius if we keep emitting at the rate we are emitting. So there's definitely a big need for reducing emissions. Next slide. So it is not that nothing is happening because of the climate change problem. All the countries have come together under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And I'm sure you must have heard of the Paris Agreement. It's an agreement that almost all the countries in the world have signed. And what this Paris Agreement mandates is that every country will decide that how much emission reduction they're going to do over a period of, let's say, between 2020 and 2030, and then what they can do themselves for what are the emission reduction activities for which they need external help. And this is like a commitment from these countries which have to be met for that period of time. This is like self-decided commitment that, okay, I will reduce my emissions by that level. Okay, so this is the image of the Paris Agreement signing that happened in 2015. It also mandates that the developed countries will provide financing to developing countries and also help in adaptation to climate change. Next slide, please. So as part of the Paris Agreement, every country has to submit their NDC, the nationally determined contribution. And India has also submitted its nationally determined contribution. It was actually submitted on 2nd of October 2015 as INDC, and then it was accepted. And it's like a target that India has taken to be implemented between 2020 and 2030. And the target is that there are three quantitative targets. One is that we will reduce the emission intensity of our gross domestic product, GDP, by 33 to 35%. What it means is that if I am emitting, let's say, 1 ton of carbon dioxide for $1 of my GDP production as a country, then in the future, in the next 10 years, between 2020 and 2030, I'll reduce it by 33 to 35%. Secondly, there is this target that 40% of the installed capacity for electricity generation in India will be non-fossil fuel based. That will be renewable energy. And the third quantitative target is that we are going to, as a country, it has been decided to create a carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons. This is a very big target, considering that we already have around 20% forest, and there will be a need for a lot more afforestation to achieve this target. There are other targets like mobilizing financing from developed countries, doing adaptation activities, propagating healthy and sustainable lifestyle. So to meet these NDC targets, there are national missions, as well as every state has prepared something called a state action plan on climate change, which is like a state level document that includes all the activities that will be implemented for reducing emissions, as well as for adaptation to climate change over between the period 2020 to 2030. And also, this was a very consultative process. So NGOs, private sector, they have all, even public sector enterprises, they have all submitted their inputs. And there are it's a document that's owned by multiple stakeholders. And this is a target that Government of India has submitted to UNFCCC, that we'll achieve it between 2020 and 2030. Of course, with COVID-19, things might be slightly delayed, but yeah, I mean, hopefully we'll be definitely achieving these targets as a country. Next slide, please. So now getting into what can be done for mitigation, and before that, just having a look at this the graph, pie chart, which shows how much emission is coming from which sector. So you can see most of the emission, around 70%, is because of the energy sector. And the IPPU is basically industrial process and product use sector. That is, I think, the second largest emitting sector is agriculture, forestry, and other land use. I'll explain later in the later slides how agriculture contributes to GHG emissions. And then there is waste sector, which includes wastewater as well as municipal solid waste, which is a major contributor. And yeah, so if we look at these four big parts of the puzzle, and we try to reduce emissions in these areas, then it's very much possible that we'll be able to meet national as well as global targets of reducing emissions. Next slide. So just talking about the energy sector, we all know that most of our energy currently is coming from burning coal in thermal power plants or gas power plants, and we need to switch to renewable energy sources. And in addition, like, energy efficiency is also a very good measure for reducing emissions, because if you don't need the additional energy, then you will not have to produce it either through coal or even through renewables. And therefore, energy efficiency, I think, is the most important mitigation opportunity that India has. And there are several programs in the government which have been started by the government to promote energy efficiency. We all know of the labeling program, 5-star appliances. We all know of the LED scheme. We know about this Perform, Achieve, and Trade scheme, which is like incentivizing energy efficiency in different industries. So if an industry is putting more efforts in reducing their energy consumption or becoming more energy efficient, then they can sell energy efficiency certificates. And after energy efficiency, of course, wind, solar, hydro. I think the speaker after me would also be talking about his experience, particularly in the renewable energy sector. So these are like some of these are very standard technologies. They are already being implemented. What we need is to accelerate their implementation. But there are some technologies which are still under development, or they need more R&D support to become commercially viable. And therefore, like geothermal energy, bioenergy, tidal energy, there's a lot of research needed in these areas. And one very big issue with renewable energy is that intermittency. And also the fact that sun is not there during night. So if you have solar power plants, they don't work during the night. So you need to store enough energy during the day so that you can provide electricity during the night. Or you should have wind or biomass or gas power plants which can fulfill the gap when the solar power is not available during the night. So there's a lot of need of research and promotion of technologies that can store energy, particularly batteries. And last, we can have technology related to carbon capture and storage, because it would be difficult to have completely like it's possible, but to have no fossil fuel based power plant might be very challenging. And therefore there could be a technology that captures the carbon dioxide emitted by thermal power plants and stores it underground so that it doesn't leak back. And that way we can have some coal capacity as well, which can fill the gap between in durations when the other technologies are not able to generate electricity because the wind is not blowing and the sun is not around, or there's a water shortage for the hydropower plant and biomass is also not available. Yeah, so this is the main sector. There's a lot of focus on this sector, and it also links to the transport sector a lot, because if you have electric vehicles and those electric vehicles are charged by renewable energy generated electricity, then you have no emissions from the transport sector, which is because of burning diesel and petrol. And yeah, so I think energy sector, which includes transportation, which has implications for transportation sector emissions, if it is focused, then we can solve like 70% of the problem by just tackling this sector. And there's already a lot of progress happening, but there's a need for more investment. There's a need for more R&D, more entrepreneurship, more consumer choice. So you have a choice to buy a 5-star AC, you have a choice to buy a 5-star fridge appliances, you have a choice to be like put up rooftop solar. So there's a need for consumer awareness also, so that these technologies can be promoted. Next slide, please. So industrial sector is also very challenging sector in terms of reducing emissions, because energy efficiency is something that can be implemented across industries, and a lot of industries do implement energy efficiency measures that because it saves them cost in terms of the cost of energy that they use. But then there are still emissions that can be reduced by very innovative technologies, like for the steel sector, electric arc furnaces can replace blast furnaces, and then it leads to a lot of reduction in emissions from the steel sector. Hydrogen as a reducing agent can be used in place of natural gas in the steel sector. Of course, carbon capture can be implemented, carbon capture and storage. In case of cement sector, there's clinker substitution possibility. So use of fly ash in place of as a mix in the cement. Alternative fuels, like cement plants use a lot of coal to produce cement, and in place of coal you can put refuse derived fuel made from municipal solid waste. and that's going to reduce emissions in many cases. You can have energy efficiency. So Chatham House is a research think tank, and they have done this research that if you want to reduce emissions from the cement sector, these are the key solutions that can be implemented. It's a very large area of work. There's a lot of research happening. There's a lot of implementation work happening, and as a business, you can take like one sector and focus on developing specific technologies or solutions for reducing emissions from that sector. Yeah. So next slide. Opportunities in the waste sector. This has a lot of co-benefits also. So you can reduce waste, and that's something that's very important. So how do we as consumers, stop stop increase in waste production by using less packaging, trying to avoid use of poly bags, so that less waste is generated. Then reuse. So if we have bought something, can we reuse it and therefore lead to less consumption? And even if it's a necessary consumption and it leads to waste generation, can we recycle the product, that the waste that has been generated? So it could be plastic, paper, glass. How much can be recycled? And unfortunately, because of challenges in the business model, a lot of plastic waste is not recycled in India currently, and this has to change. So there are policy measures being implemented by the government, like the extended producer responsibility mechanism, and that is going to be implemented soon, uh, which will promote recycling. Composting, biomethanation, these are for the wet waste, like the kitchen waste, garden waste. And this is important because if you don't compost or use biomethanation solution, then this wet waste ends up in landfill and generates a lot of methane, which is quite a dangerous greenhouse gas. And particularly wastewater treatment. So if wastewater is not treated, that also releases a lot of methane. So composting, biomethanation, and wastewater treatment through different anaerobic aerobic technologies can reduce a lot of methane emissions, and therefore should be promoted. Composting is also important because it helps in improving soil carbon, which is very deficient in India. And there's a need for using compost in agriculture rather than chemical fertilizers. Also, chemical fertilizers require a lot of subsidies. I think around 60,000 crores per year is spent on fertilizer subsidy. That could be reduced if there's more compost production and more organic farming adopted in India. Next slide. Yeah, so the agriculture, forest, and land use sector, basically any type of forest conservation will lead to reduction in emissions because forests are sinks of GHG emissions. They store carbon. But if there is rampant cutting down of trees and forests are degraded, there's deforestation happening. So all that is going to add to the GHG emissions in the atmosphere. And therefore afforestation, reforestation, saving the current stock of forest, not letting people cut trees for various reasons, can really help in achieving climate change mitigation goals. Also, no-till farming, switching from chemical fertilizers to organic fertilizers or compost, conservation of forest biomass. These all measures also help in reducing GHG emissions from the agriculture and forestry sector. Then all the cattle also, they emit methane as because of enteric fermentation. And when we have rice fields which are full of water, there's methane emissions from rice cultivation also. So there are techniques of rice cultivations, and there are types of feed which is available for cattle that can help in reducing these emissions. And already there are some initiatives that are reducing emissions from rice cultivation and enteric fermentation in different countries as well as a few in India. Next slide, please. So as a business, what can we do? We have climate change mitigation opportunities that I just talked about across sectors, but we also have risks due to adverse impacts of climate change. So in terms of risk to the climate change, there are value chain risks. So if I have a business, I have a plant and that area gets flooded, I have a physical business risk. I have a risk that because of extreme heat, my staff can't work in the factory premises, or my if I'm into agri business, or if I'm into food processing and the food gets spoiled because the temperatures are very high. So these are like physical risks. There are price risk, product risk to product, that I just gave an example. But then there's also reputation risk. So if you are a company that is causing a lot of harm to the environment, it will be in the news. People will not prefer to buy your products. There could be regulations in the future where companies are asked that, okay, you are not allowed to emit more than 1 ton of carbon dioxide for 1 ton of your production. So there is a regulation risk also for companies. And therefore, there are all these risks that can be quantified for a business, and then the business can decide, okay, how do I mitigate climate change and how do I adapt in my particular sector from climate adverse impacts of climate change. So this is a very key activity that I think even small and medium enterprises should take, and it doesn't like it needs some level of expertise which is available in different consultancies, but it's also something that one can learn about on their own by reading more or by just analyzing what is happening to their business, what are the opportunities which are related to their business. And then one of the other ways of looking at it is that we have country level goal that, okay, India wants to achieve 40% renewable energy installed in by 2030. Can I get into solar business? Can I get into wind energy business? Can I get into batteries, electric vehicles? So these are, like opportunities for the businesses to consider that, okay, countries already having solar policy, already having electric vehicle promotion policy. Why don't I get into these business areas and help the country achieve its targets, as well as um, have a sustainable business of your own as well. Yeah, next slide. So in terms of adaptation options, mitigation is definitely a business case, because you're going to produce renewable energy, or you're going to have energy efficiency, or you're going to have electric vehicles. So there is some revenue that you're getting or you're saving on your costs. But when it comes to adaptation options, sometimes there's a thinking that, it's like a cost that I have to bear, and the returns are not very tangible for me. So therefore, for addressing this to climate change, there's this very good analysis that has been done by another group in GIZ, which I'm presenting. And the source of the report is available on the link below. It says that you can have no regret options like increasing water efficiency. If you're being very efficient in water use, you're saving water. You can have low regret options like green roof, wall reducing building temperature, or you can have win-win options like having a joint water reservoir between 2-3 companies together, so that you have water in terms of in times of scarcity as well. And you can have flexible or adaptive management where you can decide, okay, whether I can have this adaptation option. If this is the scenario, then I'll implement, otherwise I may not implement, or I may change my plan later. So it's not that it's always going to be an additional cost if you're planning to adapt to climate change. It can lead to additional benefits in terms of water saving, energy saving, in terms of saving health, in terms of saving your property itself, because you will be planning for how will my machinery survive if there's a half meter high flood in my area. So I should keep my machinery at a certain height. So these are just some examples of adaptation where there's also a business opportunity as well as an opportunity to reduce the risk on your own business. Okay, next slide. So these are just some examples of the types of business opportunity that adaptation offers. For example, more efficient water use, recycling, treatment, improving roofing, insulation. In India particularly, we have a huge problem of poor insulation in our buildings. So if it is very hot outside, it will be very hot inside. It will be if it is very cold outside, it will be very cold inside the house or inside the office buildings as well, because the insulation is of very poor quality. And this is something that we should really focus on, because insulation can help reduce your energy bills. It can help save your health, and even life if the outside conditions are very extreme. And then new construction material technologies that help in adapting to climate extreme weather events. new financial products like investment funds, climate derivatives, financing for adaptation products can also be implemented as an adaptation business opportunity. Green cooling related products and services. So everyone of us knows about, like, we have really extreme hot weather during the summers, and so many people are suffering because they don't have access to air conditioning services or even coolers. And yeah, so green cooling is one service area. As a service, it can be promoted. Agri-tech is another area which can be the focus for adaptation. And of course, resource efficiency. If you save resources, it helps in adaptation over a long term. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is my last slide, which talks about financing, but for the adaptation, because if you're doing any renewable energy project, energy efficiency project, there is a revenue stream, a very clear revenue stream from sale of electricity or from saving of energy use. But if you're doing adaptation projects, then you need a special type of financing, and therefore things like blended finance, microfinance, bonds, insurance. There are new ways of financing that are coming up, and one of the examples is RBL Bank in partnership with Global Climate Partnership Fund. They provided financing for reducing water consumption in to farmers, and then they made sure that the payment for the agricultural produce came first to the bank so that the loan was returned, and then the implementation also could happen. Additionally, there's a lot of need for building capacity on adaptation project development, how to design an adaptation project, and therefore my colleagues who work on adaptation issues more, they have prepared this very nice framework. If you follow it from like left to right, we don't have enough time, but you can refer these documents, and you can help these documents help you design an adaptation project which can access financing, and then it helps you reduce risk to your business, or even it can be a business opportunity. So yeah, I think I would like to close here, and looking forward to any questions or comments from the audience. Thank you.
So just another reminder for our audience. When you type out your questions, please mention whom the question is addressed to. Otherwise, we'll open it to both the speakers. We now move on to our second speaker, Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Tushar P. Ghate. Following his presentation, we will address the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aditi. Can you just upload the presentation and I will operate it myself?
All right.
Thank you. Very good evening. We just had a very important talk and knowledge sharing by Jay. Hi, I am Tushar. In last couple of months, you must all have been going through a lot of technological and scientific aspects, analytical aspects with the help of this webinar. So today, as a soldier, I would like to take you from those figures to the fact. In next 20-25 minutes or so, I would cover two important aspects. Those are solar power and agricultural farming. Having served the nation for 20 years, in last, thank you, Adit. Thank you so much. Having served the nation for 20 years, I have taken a VRS, that is premature retirement, and now settled in Pune. And since last 3 years, I have been working in two fields, that is agricultural farming and renewable energy, that is solar power. Now, as Jay has covered carbon emissions and business opportunities in renewable sector, and he has very nicely covered it at macro level. So as I said, as a soldier, from that macro, now I move on to a micro, and I would like to share my experiences which I have gained over last 3 years in these two fields. And the aim of sharing these ground experiences is to give you a cue or maybe a little bit of guidelines so that you can think of taking one of these or both of these fields as your career in next days to come. As we know, India has got two important peculiarities as far as our topic is concerned. The first one, let's talk about agriculture. We, India as a nation, mainly our resources or our survival, it is based on agriculture or agriculture related businesses. So more than 70% of our population depends on agriculture or agriculture related businesses. That is number one. And whether we like it, we don't like it, we are still in a primitive stage as far as this agriculture is considered as a business. Now, coming to second peculiarity, that is a population explosion. We, India, as a nation, we are at number two as far as the population is concerned. So we are growing at a very fast rate, and this huge increase in population requires huge amount of energy, or I would put it electricity. So these two things, if we connect together, then we are at challenge, we are at problem. So rather than we waiting for any government or any politician or any bureaucrat to act on it and solve our problems, we as young professionals, why don't we think of taking it as an opportunity and solving this problem for a society and prosper ourselves? There's a very famous saying by Sun Tzu: victory comes from finding opportunities in the problem. Today, a farmer or agricultural sector, it is in problem. Or huge energy crunch, it's a big problem. So why not to extend our hand to these problems so that they get benefited, and as well as we find a professional opportunity in that, so that it becomes a profession and we also help the society. So let's first talk about nuances of solar energy. I will quickly glance through the slides, make you orient about the aspects of solar energy and the opportunities which are there in this particular field. Then I will hook on to agricultural farming, nuances of it, and then the opportunities. And towards end, I would like to present a workable template, that is agro-technological cluster. So we will first quickly go through the solar energy part. As you can see, the population worldwide is increasing at a rate more than 1% per year. And what you can see, from 2019 to 20, we have added more than 8 crore of population globally. And a point of concern, that density of population per square kilometer, which was hardly 30, it has gone up to 52. So there is a huge population explosion worldwide, and India is not exception to it. As I mentioned earlier, we stand at number two. Coming to energy crunch, as you can see it on slide, there is a huge disparity as far as per capita power consumption is concerned. In Iceland, a person consumes more than 50,000 units annually, as compared to India, where we are much below 1,000. And let's not even mention the countries like Haiti, who are not consuming even 39 units per annum. So if we see the population explosion, and if it is expected or it is anticipated that this population by 2030 would be consuming around 2,400 units per person per year. So if we take these two inputs, what inference, what we can draw, probably because of this population explosion, there will be a huge energy requirement. Now, how to fulfill this energy requirement? We have got two important resources, as mentioned by Jay. One is non-renewable and renewable source. We all know that non-renewable resources are rapidly depleting, and the availability is governed by the stocking policies, because a lot of countries today, they are conserving their non-renewable resources and keeping it as a reserve for the future. Then obviously it is going to be governed by the cost factor and political angle, what we have recently seen with Iran. So what inference we can draw as far as India is concerned, that there is an immediate requirement of self-reliance. Self-reliance for availability of a definite type of energy which will be sustainable. So out of non-renewable and renewable, India has option of choosing renewable source. Now, when we say renewable energy, we will not get into the comparisons, merits and demerits amongst the renewable sources. We will consider solar energy as one of the options. Why solar energy? Because it's a renewable energy. It has got a very high EROEI. What exactly it means, we will see it in next slide. That is energy received or energy invested. And as today's topic revolves around the carbon emissions, this is going to save lot of carbon footprints and save lot of carbon emissions. Just to give you an example, in 2018, the world emitted almost 35.3 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide while producing this energy using non-renewable resources. And it is expected to touch 43 billion metric tons by 2050 if we continue using this non-renewable energy as one of the options. What I was talking about, EROEI, that is energy received or energy invested. So if you can see towards left, that is life cycle stages. Now consider example that suppose we want to produce 1 unit of electricity. Let's take two options. The first option, we can take it as PV solar, that is photovoltaic, using the solar energy. So if we are generating 1 unit of electricity, so for that, hardly 40 grams of carbon dioxide will be emitted to the environment per unit of electricity. And if you compare it with non-renewable, that is coal, we will end up in emitting almost 1 kilogram of carbon dioxide for the same amount of energy. So if we choose the option of renewable, that is solar energy, there would be almost what we would be saving 25 times of carbon footprints as compared to the energy what we get from coal. Another important and interesting fact what you can see, when we are manufacturing those solar panels, we are investing out of these 40 grams, almost 60 to 70% of energy would be invested during the upstream process as compared to 1% as far as coal is concerned. But the most important thing is that operational process. During operational process, we hardly use 21% of the energy, or other 21% of input, while we actually produce electricity with the solar panels. And if we compare it with non-renewable, that is a huge amount, almost touching 98 to 99%. And one important aspect what I would like to bring here, that once a solar panel is manufactured, then the lifespan of the solar panel is almost 30 years. Obviously, we cannot compare this particular thing with coal. But the inference what we can draw from here, that if we switch over to renewable source, there will be a huge saving in carbon footprint. Now, when we talk about the solar energy, let's talk about our nation as such. India is really blessed because geographically, the way we are situated, you can see on this slide that in India, we have got potential of producing more than 250 watts of energy per square meter per year. So I would say it's a free raw input what is available to you, in which you need not even invest a single penny. So if we harness it in a proper way, there's a huge potential for this. Now, various options, what Jay mentioned, earlier, how we can harness solar energy, solar thermal energy, solar PV, that is light energy to electrical energy, which is used uh, maximum in world. And the third one is solar chemical energy. We will not waste our time here, and we will restrict our discussion towards photovoltaic, that is from light energy to electrical energy. Now, I will quickly touch upon the carbon footprints and then again move on to the solar power and the opportunities in it. So solar power, if we use it in a proper way, it would generate 22% of world's electricity by 2050. So this figure is between 22% to 40. If we optimize our resources and use it to its fullest extent, even we can touch 40%. So this would remove significant fraction of growing global carbon dioxide in next decades to come. So having talked about the solar energy, its implications worldwide, then I come to the mechanisms or operationalization. You as young budding professional, you would be wanting to know, or you must be curious. That's okay. We have seen about carbon footprints, mitigation, availability of solar energy, and then what all harms are caused if we go with non-renewable. But as a young professional, when I pass out from my academy, what are the opportunities in this particular field? So a very interesting graph here. If you can see from 2000 to 2020, or even you can go ahead up to 2030 and so on, solar industry has got a whopping growth of 40% per annum. And in India, with government's vision of achieving 100 gigawatt of solar power generation, we are even at nowhere, not even at 1% or 2%. So why I brought out this point, there is a huge potential for young professional in this particular field, and you can work here, and the sky is the limit for you. I'll spend few minutes here. What are the avenues available when we talk about solar energy as one of your career option? These could be solar rooftop systems. So in last 3 years, as a, I would say, entrepreneur or as a startup, in last 3 years, I was able to set up more than 50 micro and small and medium sized rooftop solar power plants in Maharashtra. And I'm very happy to share a few facts and figures with you. This required virtually no investment. That is number one. The government policies now, they are well in place. And number three, when we do it as a business, like in last 3 years, I have set up these power plants which have cumulative capacity of more than 500 kilowatts. So I'm happy to share that in last these 500 kilowatt plant, they actually reduce the carbon emission by 500 tons per year. So in last 3 years, when I did this business, I also saved 1500 tons of carbon emission. So that's a good part of it. So rooftop solar systems, you must be aware, it is nothing but whatever is your energy requirement for 24 hours, you generate those many electric units during daytime, you consume whatever you want to during daytime, and whatever you have generated surplus, you feed it to the grid, electricity grid, and when the sun is down, your system is down, you take it back. So it's nothing but you redeem your power units, and that's how you can reduce your electricity bills to a great extent. Second, solar water pumps. Again, this is very important thing, because in India, as I said, the farmers are struggling with availability of electricity, and at a lot of remote places, the electricity is a big problem. So solar water pumps is again a great opportunity wherein you can have it as a business and you can help farmers for providing an assured water source. Third one, solar dryers. It is very important field, because today the farmers, they produce various types of foods, grains and vegetables, but because of uncertainty in the market and since they do not have a proper storage facility, this entire thing goes as a waste, or they sell it at throwaway price. So you can bring in this solar dry technology, where you can concentrate the solar energy and you can convert your vegetables, foods, and other products in dried form, and then you can store it, and then you can sell it at appropriate time and appropriate price. So it has got a huge potential, and it requires virtually no investment in this. Solar operated air conditioners, again, a very good field where you can think of having it as a profession. Solar charged battery operated vehicles. I would just share my experience. Last year, I visited China. Of course, that time the COVID was not there, definitely. So almost what I could see, every person had a bike. So they were using the bikes, but those bikes, all of them, almost more than 90% bikes, they were solar operated battery charged bikes. So from one place to another, they used to take that bike. So whenever they want, they used to cycle it, and when they were in hurry or they wanted to carry more loads, they used to switch on the battery mode. In India, it's a huge potential in city areas as well as in rural areas. So solar charged battery operated vehicles, it could be two-wheelers and four-wheelers. A lot of startups can think of having it as a proper business opportunity. Solar lights, again, a very good opportunity. Again, I will spend a minute on the last point, that is solar powered pyrolysis. As brought out by Jay, waste management is a big and crucial challenge in India. So when we talk about this particular thing, how to take care of the plastic which is not decomposable. So today, pyrolysis technique is used to take care of the plastic, but for that, again, the energy input is in form of electrical energy or in form of any other source. If we are able to harness solar energy, either we convert it into electrical energy, or straight away we use solar energy, we concentrate it and convert it into thermal energy, then the pyrolysis of plastic which comes out of waste using solar technique has got a huge potential. And I would suggest young budding entrepreneurs and students who will be passing out to think seriously on this particular opportunity. So to summarize about solar technology, there is a tremendous demand considering the population explosion and per capita energy deficit, especially in regions like Asia and Africa. There's a huge demand for non-renewable resources which are going to get depleted. Then we need to have an immediate need of hour for India for self-reliance. We need to switch rapidly towards renewable sources, and mainly solar energy is one of that, which will save carbon footprints to great extent. It has a fast and bright business opportunity. And this particular energy, we can also think of using it in our clusters, that is agro-technological clusters, what we would be talking in next 10 minutes. So now we have thought clean, that is think clean, and from think clean to think healthy. We will quickly glance through the slides because of the time constraint, and then we will have the workable template what I can suggest you, and then we will be available for interaction. Now, agriculture in India. Today, why agriculture sector is ignored? First of all, even if more than 70% population depends on agriculture or agriculture-based businesses, this sector is disorganized. You take an example of any small business. It could be anything. It could be garment industry. It could be any other thing, or even it could be parlors. It could be gymnasium. All these sectors, they have organized themselves in such a way that they can bring forward their points, put across their problems, pose their problems to government, and they are benefited with that because of a great organization. But the worst part of it, as far as agriculture industry or agriculture sector is concerned, because of socio-economic angles in that, this sector is disorganized today. Today, the farmers, I am bringing out the hard facts initially, and then we will get on to the silver line of it. In India, the farmer actually executes his farming with a very poor planning. I will quickly give you an example. I hail from a rural area in Maharashtra. Few years back, there was a success story which was shown on TV channels, that one farmer, he planted drumsticks and he earned lakhs of rupees in, say, 1 acre of land. So without thinking of any market aspects or input output cost and any predictions, almost each and every farmer in my tehsil, they grew drumsticks, and those drumsticks, which were supposed to be sold at the rate of 60 to 70 rupees per kilo, in those 2 to 3 years, this 60 to 70 rupees of kilo price crashed to 50 paisa per kilo. So that's a result of poor planning. Very less adoption of technology. We do not really want to adopt new technologies. Let's take example of Israel. The, I would say, population and the area of Israel is not even more than a district, Pune district, from where I hail from. So, but if today you see Israel, it is one of the important country, or I would say the first, they are the they are, it is the nation who is producing the maximum agricultural produce, and it has happened because of the adoption of new technologies and optimization of the resources. Today, in agriculture sector, there is a very less participate from educated lot. In our during our childhood, there used to be a saying that ये लड़का अगर कुछ नहीं कर सकता है, then उसको खेती करने के लिए भेजो. So there was not much of educational background when we talk about these farmers. So there is a requirement to change this particular thing. Then lack of interest by young population. Today, a son of a farmer who has got a land of even say 10 acres in his rural area, he is not interested in doing farming. He comes to a city area, and there he's happy doing any menial task, and he's happy to work as a labor or work in a hotel as a waiter. So that's worst part of it. Today in India, we are largely depending upon climate as far as our agricultural as far as we talk about agriculture as a business or as a farming. We largely depend upon monsoon, and then, because I would not blame it, but definitely because of lack of finances and proper technology, that is what the reality is. Lack of adoption of innovations, and yes, in agricultural sector, still we are struggling with funds, so there is lack of investment. Then socio-political aspects, again self-explanatory, we will not get into the details. So these were the black areas, and now we hook on to the scenario today as such. As you say, the livelihood for more than 50% of India's population, that is primarily resources, and you add up another 12%, that is again indirectly it can be their resource, or it can be their dependency. Today, food industry is poised for a huge growth. Now let's talk about the silver lining, and increasing contribution to world's food trade every year due to its immense potential for value addition. So food processing industry, it has got a tremendous potential in India and worldwide per se. Indian food and grocery market today, it's world sixth largest, with retailing contributing more than 70% of the sale. Here, I would like to draw your attention. If you are planning to take agro farming as a your career, then you must aim at this retailing cluster. We will talk about it little later. Coming to organic food segment, not even at very high rate, but still it has got a growth rate of 10%. And during 2015 and 25, next 10 years to come, we are at 2020, we are expected to reach the business of 75,000 crores. So it has got a huge potential. Now, government is also working in these fields. There are achievements in these sectors. Quite recently, government has set up Electronic National Agriculture Market, that is ENAM. It is nothing but it is similar to our share market. So all mandis are connected, and now we can have a uniform rate and the variety. And there, the trader will have a very less say, and the farmers will be able to sell their product in the market at the realistic cost. There are various government initiatives and subsidies which are available where we will not waste our time and move on to the next segment as such. Now, the road ahead. As the goal set up by the government, the first one doubling the farm income by 2022. So this particular point, it gives you a straight hope and opportunity that there is a tremendous business in agriculture field. Now, increase investment in agriculture infrastructure such as irrigation facility, warehousing, and cold storages. Adoption of food safety and quality assurance mechanisms, which have been adopted by government quite recently to take ourselves at par with international market. Then we have got something called as a GMP, and then we have got GHP. And the last point, that is agri export from India is likely to reach a target of 60 billion in another 2 years to come. So huge potential what we have got. Skip these slides because of time. Now coming to agrotech cluster, what I want to bring out as a operational template. Now, aim of bringing out this particular concept is to set up a sustainable and financially viable agrotech cluster. What all driving factors it will have? The first one, this cluster should be, or rather it must be, profit making business. Second, it will have state of art technology, or it will be open to a technology. While we adopt this cluster, automatically we will be reducing the carbon footprints. How? We will just see it in subsequent slides. It will have social reforms, because while we do our business, we will be helping the society, and there will be social reform. Gender equality, again, it will have participation from both male and female, because today in India, females, or other ladies, they are putting their best as far as the agriculture sector is concerned, not only as a labor, but today as young entrepreneur also. There are success stories in this particular field. And while we are connected to the nature directly, definitely another advantage is that we will have a good health while we work. Now, how it will work? Now, let's talk about the operationalization, and let's talk about the template. You young professionals, or you budding aspirants in this field, you can think of taking it as a profession. So I would suggest you form a group, like-minded people. It could be group starting with 2 3, and it can go up to 10 15 and so on. Then you set up your goals, have a roadmap, make a detailed template, identify a cluster location. Now when you form a group of 3 4 individuals all together, then it's quite possible and it's quite likely that one of you would hail from a rural background. So there will be there will be ease in finding out a location to start this particular concept. So once you identify the location to set up this cluster, then get on to the operationalization part of it. Now I will talk about agrotech cluster as such with 5 acres concept. Now in this, let's take example of 5 acres. So you can set up your business in 5 acres. Now taking over these 5 acres can be done in 2 ways. You can lease, take this land on lease, or you can, if you have got your own land and you're owning it, then you can start this business straight away on that land. You young professionals come together, then you distribute your responsibilities. Two important aspects to be kept in mind. The first one is the back-end process, that how you are going to produce the crops, vegetables and grains. That is number one. And second important aspect is the front end, how you are going to sell it in the market at a proper rate with a good quantity and quality. So these two important aspects, they need to be addressed equally. Otherwise, you will produce a good amount, a good quantity of food, vegetable, grains, fruits, but if you have not studied the market, your entire efforts will go as a waste. While you do that, you should have maximum emphasis on automation, use solar oblique renewable energy, you use solar operated water pumps, what I have been doing it in my farms. You must have predictive approach while you select your plantation. Otherwise, what happens generally, I will give you example in India or rather in Maharashtra. The farmers, when they see the onion has skyrocketed as far as values are, the prices are concerned, everybody is into onion farming, and the prices what a normal farmer used to get 30 rupees, 40 rupees a kg, it goes down to even 50 paisa or 10 paisa per kg. So we need to have a predictive approach while selecting our crops, and for that we need to have detailed market analysis. There is a requirement of proper storage facility. We need to have producer customer connect also, because whatever are the requirements of the customer, we need to address it in such a way that that type and that amount of produce, if we are able to take it out from our farms, then we are in a win-win situation. Consider uncertainty factor, because in agriculture sector there is a large amount of uncertainty factor which requires to be addressed holistically, and with that we need to have the social responsibility. I'll not waste time here because we are running short of the time. So it's a win-win situation for the customer as well as for the producer. I'll quickly give a couple of examples how to go about it, or what I have started or I'm in the process. I'll take 2 minutes for this. You can have a concept of, like I said, 5 acres. In that, initially you can select a group of 50 families. So you take on the responsibility of providing fresh vegetables to them. So a normal middle class family will be more than happy to spend 500 rupees per week. So it amounts to 2000 rupees per family per week. So if you have got a cluster of 50 families, you would be able to generate almost 1 lakh rupees per month. So as a rough guideline, you can take 30% as an input cost, and you would be having a saving of 70,000 rupees per month out of these 50 families. Now just imagine if you want to provide a good amount of and a fresh and healthy vegetables to these families, 50 families, how much area you would require? It is not more than half an acre. So if you plan to do it in 2 acres, probably you would be targeting 200 families. So out of your 5-acre land, you have plantation for these vegetables in 2 acres, which will generate a revenue of 4 lakh rupees per year. And after that, you take out 30% of input cost, and whatever would be your saving, it is available for you as a revenue generation and funds to again develop the next cluster. So that's I would say pragmatic part of it. I have started it on a small scale, but definitely what I'm talking is with sheer experience. Now, out of this 2 acre, out of these 5 acres, you have used 2 acres for vegetables. Now, another 2 acres, you can use it for planting the fruit gardens, which will give you a assured resource, and you can supply these fruits to these clusters or these families. And another 1 acre you can keep it as an administrative area or logistic area, where you can have the cattles which will be used for milk, or even these cattles are very important as far as getting the organic fertilizer. So cow dung is very, very important, which is very rich. Cow urine and cow dung, which gives quite good amount of nutrition values and nitrogen, which is very, very important. And with that, we can save a lot on chemical fertilizers. So while doing all these things, you must resort yourself, or you must switch on to residue free, or rather I would say organic farming. Last example I would like to give you, last 3 years I am doing organic farming, and I have been growing watermelons. This year I kept one watermelon in an open area in an ambient temperature. When I plucked it and I kept it just to see how much shelf life it can have, to my pleasant surprise, it lasted for more than 2.5 months. So that was the beauty of it, because I had not used any chemicals or any fertilizers while I grew these watermelons. So you can definitely think of having it, and you do it as organic farming. So friends, I would like to conclude with saying that let's mesh these two things together. And I take again a cue from a lecture given by Jay. There are problems as far as carbon footprints are concerned in two sectors, that is energy sector, because in energy sector lot of carbon emissions, so we can switch on to solar power. And secondly, agriculture sector also, we can switch on to organic farming, use it as a business, and which will save the carbon footprints to a large extent. Aditi, sorry, I have exceeded the time, so I would like to conclude my talk, and we are open
Sure.
for the question.
Just a question, sir. Do you still want to display the poll that you had given us?
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't get you.
Would you like to display your poll question?
Yeah, please. Yeah, I have given it. Yeah, so you can just display.
Just a second.
Yeah.
Yes, so you'll be able to see a poll on your screen. Yeah. Considering the long-term effects of COVID-19, which sector in India will have sustainable growth prospects? Requesting the audience to please vote. We'll turn off the voting in a couple of seconds. So that's interesting. A solid 43%, 41%, sorry, of our audience thinks that agriculture faces the most sustainable growth prospects when in the post-COVID recovery. So thank you so much for sharing your experience and knowledge with us. Before we begin the Q&A, I'd like to quickly go over some key points that were discussed. To begin with our first speaker, Mr. Jaikumar Gaurav, sir. After your poll at the start, I think I speak for the audience when I say that it was eye-opening for us to see that emissions had not reduced as much as we thought they had, even during the lockdown. You then went on to clarify some conceptual differences between mitigation and adaptation, and your explanation of different national and international frameworks that exist to mitigate climate change was very comprehensive, especially India's nationally determined contributions that helped us contextualize India's efforts against climate change and what our targets actually are. You mentioned energy efficiency in particular, and how that's a very viable option for India, and how businesses can have a sector-wise impact in waste management, transport, agriculture, etc., amongst others. Coming to businesses in particular, you touched upon several types of risk that businesses are prone to physical risks, price and supply chain risks, and reputation and regulation risk. All of these, of course, associated with climate change. So, thoroughly analyzing these risks is imperative to the survival of that business, as you mentioned, and how businesses must genuinely consider renewable energy in terms of a monetary opportunity and apart from an overarching goal for its particular country. You concluded with financing, which of course is essential for any of those plans to come to fruition, and how there are new ways of financing that can help us achieve our objectives. Lieutenant Colonel Tushar, sir, you began with reminding us of the urgency to address the problem of climate change. Your focus remained largely on agriculture, which, as you rightly said, is a sector that employs a significant number of Indians. A couple of socioeconomic problems that you mentioned were population explosion, a disparity in per capita consumption of power, which therefore leaves us unprepared for a huge increase in consumption of power in the coming years. And speaking of turning problems into opportunities, you spoke about the solar energy sector, photovoltaic energy in particular, which remains an increasingly feasible option for us given its low carbon footprint and high EROEI. And your own experience in turning a problem into an opportunity, which is your success in setting up solar plants in Maharashtra, is an inspiring story for all of us, for sure. And you enumerated the various uses of solar power in transport, pyrolysis for waste management, electrical appliances, once again reiterating the need to make the shift to renewable energy. And of course, towards the end, you gave us an overview of the current scenario of the agriculture sector and how, despite its issues, it has tremendous potential for growth. And judging by the poll, our audience seems to think the same. And while also giving us an operational template for the agrotech sector, which also has a positive socio-economic impact. So once again, thank you to the speakers. And without any further delay, I will be asking you the first question posed by our audience. Mr. Jayakumar, sir, if you could come on screen, that would be great, because I believe this first question is addressed to both the speakers. Are you sure about India reaching its Paris targets? Because Prime Minister Modi envisages 450 gigawatts from renewables by 2030. And according to the trends over the last couple of years, we are averaging around 10 gigawatts of renewable capacity per year. So that means by 2030, we only have added 190 gigawatts to the existing 86 gigawatts. Therefore, how do we address that gap? And if you could shed some light on the transportation sector and hydrogen as an alternative fuel.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, the target, the Paris Agreement related NDC target says 40% of the installed capacity. It doesn't specify 450 gigawatts or 175 gigawatt by 2022. These are like not mentioned in the NDC. So the NDC target is 40% installed capacity renewables. And I think that's very much possible considering the pace of renewals. Nobody knows the future, so there could be more accelerated deployment in like you cannot have a unitary method that because I've been because the country has been putting only 10 gigawatt every year for last 10 years, so the next 10 years also only 10 gigawatt would be installed. Maybe because of COVID, economic slowdown, the overall capacity will not increase, and then also there will be more implementation of renewables. So 40% target is very likely in my view. In terms of mobility, I really think that for two-wheelers, for short distance commuting, the like two-wheelers fossil fuel powered two-wheelers don't make any sense. And one can have like electric scooters are way more cheaper. It's just the fun of speed and like we want to have fancy bikes. That's why people buy non-electric two-wheelers. I think if you are just traveling 20 kilometers to your office and coming back using a two-wheeler, or going for a small shopping nearby using a petrol two-wheeler, it will be cheaper if you use an electric two-wheeler. So that is almost a win-win. So two-wheelers have real business sense. Four-wheelers, the cost is still higher, and unless you're using it at a very high, like the kilometer mile use every day is very high, it might not make sense for people to buy electric cars at this current cost levels, and therefore we have this subsidy scheme, and it's a projection that the cost of batteries will go down, and then the electric cars would become comparable to petrol cars. There's a lot petrol and diesel cars. There's a lot of consumer awareness, consumer trust development, this range issue. Like nobody drives 200 kilometers in a regular, for months. You don't drive 200 kilometers a day, but everyone is concerned when they're buying a electric car that, oh, it cannot run for 200 kilometers in one charge. I mean, how long do you go 200 kilometers? How often do you go 200 kilometers in a day? And then there's also this charging infrastructure issue. Whether if suppose if I have to go to a city that is 200 kilometers away, do I get charging there so that I can come back? All those issues exist. But the point is that there is a need for government support, which is already there and might increase. But what's important is that people start considering these issues. The unfortunate thing currently is that the level of awareness on the very limited. The price sensitivity in Indian consumers is very high, and unless something makes absolutely high business sense or saving sense, economic sense, there is not a very high intent to go for green alternatives. Rather, even if there is an economic sense, people prefer using the older fossil fuel vehicles, and still opting for low efficiency electric appliances because of just lock-ins. Because I have a 10-year-old air conditioner, I continue using it even if I get a higher bill and I don't switch to more efficient AC. So these are some issues that can be addressed by increased awareness, and also by having some kind of incentive scheme from the government, awareness programs from the government side. Yeah, I think that would be my.
Sure. This next question is for you, Tushar sir. Have you been using digital technologies to prepare better for weather variability, understand market access, etc.? How far do our farmers have access to such technologies?
Yeah, very rightly brought out. It's an important aspect today, because what I just mentioned, that today the farmers, they are not using these technologies. What is happening, like when you say you want to go for we are doing this paddy plantation today. So the farmers today, what they do, they only go by the dates, and then they go for the plantation. Then they end up into a lot of problem, because then they do not forecast, and they do not anticipate the rainfalls. So now there is a requirement, and now slowly we have started getting into those techniques. Rather, we are using AccuWeather as one of the, I would say, the platform which gives us a very fair idea that when we can start our plantation. Because recently I have used AccuWeather when I did my plantation of maize in Sholapur district, and it worked very well, and it had even a success rate of more than 70%. So just want to bring out using these digital techniques, I would say, or these predictive techniques. Since last 15 days, or now it's we are into third week, there was no requirement of irrigating my fields, because I restricted myself and I used this technology, and this is how I'm getting benefited. So this is one of the thing. And again, when we talk about the digitalization, it is very much important, because I will just give you a small example. During drip irrigation, if we use this digitization, like what we have got are irrigation pumps or water pumps, what we have installed on rivers, and which are at quite remote places. So every time now, my person, he does not require to go there physically and switch on the motors. So what we have hooked on to the digital and GPRS systems. So now sitting here in my home in Pune, I can switch on the electric motor or this water pump which is even 50 kilometers and 100 kilometers away. So digitization is helping in a great way, but there is a huge scope for that. And where I think that these young budding professionals and students, they can chip in.
Okay, great. Jay, sir, there are a couple of questions that I'll combine and ask you because they seem to touch upon the same topic. Yes, could you comment on India's options in cooperation with other countries in generating climate finance and joint R&D in green technology in sectors such as energy and transport? And on a similar vein, there was a question on yes, can India's climate targets be affected by Indo-China relations, considering India imports many solar equipment from China?
Okay. So for the first question, there's already a lot happening. So I work for GIZ, which is the German Development Agency, and we have a lot of projects with which are like partnership projects between Government of Germany and Government of India, different ministries, particularly Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and also Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. There are different projects that look at how to accelerate deployment of clean technologies, how to accelerate climate change adaptation work. And then there are separate agencies which are looking at science and technology research particularly. So CGIAR is one example where like countries collaborate for agriculture related research. There are country to country collaborations for R&D on clean technologies, on agriculture sector adaptation. There are several examples, and all of these can be increased in the climate finance space. It's separate from research, let's say. So there are these research collaboration activities, and then there's climate finance, which is a different area altogether. And there it's like financing in form of debt for renewable energy projects, financing for setting up distribution infrastructure, financing for improving, like even for this electric mobility. Now, so there's some projects which are going on which on electric charging, promoting electric charging stations, providing financing for them. And the target is $100 billion a year that the developed countries have to provide to the developing countries. And it has to be quite a lot of it should come through the Green Climate Fund, but it hasn't happened. The levels are much lower than $100 billion. Maybe in the coming years, this will improve. And it's also a mix. So it can be a grant as well as a debt financing. And debt financing can be from the private sector also. And if you look at renewable energy sector in particular, there's so much money that's coming in form of debt from developed countries to finance clean energy projects in India. So there's a lot happening, but still a huge gap exists, which can be fulfilled if there is more cooperation between countries. And there is, so there is a need for greater policy clarity also. So if the policies are suitable in India, like we say, the ease of doing business. So unless that gets improved, financing will always be a challenge, not just for renewables, for any business. So that side is also something that Government of India is already working a lot, and there has been a lot of improvements. But it needs further work, especially now with the COVID crisis. There's an economic like recession is going to come, or it's already there. And we need very supportive policies to promote any kind of financing, whether it's clean energy or any other technology financing.
That's right. All right, I can see we have a couple of questions, but unfortunately, we'll be able to take one last question. This is open for both the speakers. Could you talk about India's current ownership framework of renewable energy industry? Is it entirely turning into a private sector? Do you think it should have state intervention or not? Considering the discoms in many states are unable to pay the amount to companies due to multiple reasons, which puts them in a tough spot.
Yeah, maybe I can take first, and then Tushar
You can take on,
say. Basically, okay. Thank you. Thanks. So basically, we have like a lot of private sector investment, but also the PSUs, NTPC. We have like a lot of PSUs are investing in renewable energy. And I don't have the exact statistics, but I think it's mainly private sector driven, because there are now very large companies that are into renewable energy generation. We have Adani, we have Renew Power, we have Tata Power. So all the large players are there in the renewable energy space, and maybe their installed capacity is more than the public sector enterprises installed capacity. And it's probably a good thing, because it's a business sector, and if the private sector does well in it, then the government can put its focus on other areas which are more important. So it's always said that health, education, and security. So I think these should be the main areas for government to focus, and other things, other sectors could be, very business driven or market driven. Unfortunately, the question, whoever asked the question is right, that discoms are in a very bad financial condition, and government has come up with different programs to improve the financial health of the distribution companies. The problem is that there's this politics of giving free power, giving giving free power for agriculture as well as for different types of consumers, and charging the industrial consumers more or commercial consumers more. It's also necessary in some cases, because electricity is like an essential requirement. So it's a very tough balance. But if a government decides to pay or give free power, or very low cost subsidized power, then that subsidy should come to the distribution company's account, so that it can pay the generator. So it should not become a non-payment from the government side, also non-payment from the farmer or the other consumer also. And then the distribution company is not able to pay the generator, because then nobody will put up a solar power plant or a wind power plant if the government is not paying the businessman who has put his money, who has taken a loan to set up that power plant. So this policy change is required, or maybe if not a policy change, at least some kind of financial support to the distribution companies is required from the government side. And some kind of changes are required in terms of what we pay for electricity. Like I mostly live in Delhi, and in Delhi, the domestic consumers pay very less for electricity. And actually 200 units, you don't have to pay anything. So I mean, who is paying for it? The government is paying, but suppose if the government doesn't pay, then the distribution company, how will it pay the generator of that electricity? So I think paying for essential services, electricity, water, cleanliness, if we don't do it, if the middle class doesn't do it, or if we don't take it in our own hands, like you put up your own solar power plant, invest your own money if you want cheaper power. Why to make it a political issue and ask the government to pay, and then the government doesn't pay, then the distribution company can't pay, and then the whole sector goes into problems. We all have lived through childhood days when there was no electricity for hours or for days sometimes in different cities. So we don't want to end up in a similar situation, and therefore we should avoid free riding, or I mean, at least for people who can pay. If somebody is very poor, farmers, they are having agricultural sector is in crisis, they can't pay their loans back, they can't pay for the electricity, that understandable. But well-to-do consumers, when they don't pay for electricity, then of course it's going to be a problem for the sector, and eventually it will have implications. So either the government will have to pay on their behalf as a subsidy, or it will lead to a collapse of the market, which we should avoid by having better policies, and the consumers should pay for electricity. I'm sure if that happens, then we will not have this problem of Discom being in a financial bad situation.
Yeah. Taking it a little further, I would like to underline the importance of rooftop solar systems here with two things. Like, as rightly brought out by Jay, there are very big players like Reliance and Adani's who are investing in a quite big way when they are setting up solar power plants, which are to the tune of megawatts. But for a small player like me, or even you as a customer, if you are planning to set up a rooftop solar system for yourself, or you are doing it as a business, a medium scale business, then the investments are very low, as I said, and which can be managed within own resources. So that is one thing which underlines or brings out the importance of rooftop solar. And the second thing, which is very important, that if we like these rooftop solar systems, we need to give more importance to it, because today in India, the transmission and distribution losses, when we talk about the electricity, they are touching to 28 to 30%. So that's how these discoms, they are getting into a lot of losses because of this transmission and distribution losses. So if we are generating electricity at our own rooftop, then there will be a huge reduction in T&D losses, and that's how the discom can be in a very, very comfortable situation. So that's what I would say.
All right. Thank you. And thank you to everyone for your questions. You've been a really great audience. In case we didn't have the time to answer your questions, please do reach out to us via email. We'll be happy to forward your question to the speakers. Before we conclude for the day, please spare us a few more minutes of your time. This is our third webinar series, and we do take your feedback and opinions very seriously. The feedback and opinion given to us by our audience during the previous webinars have helped shaped this particular series as well. There will be a poll that will appear on your screen in a couple of seconds. It's just a few questions, so we request you to fill it up. Could we have the poll, please? Yeah. I believe it's just about 5 or 6 questions. And once again, thank you for your patience and your cooperation. When you're done with all the answers, just scroll all the way down and hit submit. And anyway, with that, we conclude today's webinar on technology, innovation, climate change, and businesses. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our speakers, Mr. Jaykumar Gaurav and Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Tushar P. Ghate, for their insight and knowledge and for sharing it with us. It's been a pleasure to host you. On behalf of the entire team at Covins, I would like to thank all the participants for showing their support by joining the session today. Covins, PRISM, and the Center for Climate Studies at Manipal hope to see you in our future webinars as well. As you're probably aware, today's webinar is a part of the ongoing series on climate change, environmental security, and political risks. On the 23rd of July, we have the final webinar in the series on the topic Political Risk, Business and Climate Change, Cases from South and Southeast Asia, with speakers Dr. Dhanashree Jairam and Dr. Vignesh Ram. So make sure to mark your calendars for that. You don't want to miss out. Do remember that you will receive a certificate of participation after you attend all the webinars in this series. We also urge you to keep an eye out on some certificate courses that Covins will be launching in the near future. Finally, please reach out to us if you would like to know more about our products and services. You can also get in touch via our social media platforms on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. We look forward to seeing you again soon, and wherever you are, stay safe and have a good night.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.